I wanted to speak a little bit about that because even though it is the Norwegian, it is essentially, just as you've stated before, the story of Polly and his eventual downfall to Big Frank. Speak a little bit about the titles, the use of the epigraphs that we've spoken about before, and how they kind of tie in together that way.
Where does the book 4 start? Give me a page number.
It begins at 1873, and I can read the epigraph to you. It says, "As for me, I would rather be a worm and a wild apple than a son of man. But we are what we are, and we might remember not to hate any person, for all are vicious, and not be astonished at any evil. All are deserved, and not fear death. It is the only way to be cleansed." Original sin, Robinson Jefferson.
Well, I mean, this is probably of the 4 epigraphs. And you talked about the use of epigraphs in the books, and certainly there's an epigraph in chapter 54. And I use epigraphs well. And original sin, obviously, that has a very biblical connotation that applies very much to the book. Virtually all of these characters, but as we are, what is it? Not all are vicious. Pretty much every character in the book, every main character is vicious. Even someone like Andy Warhol and Truman Capote, who aren't killers and who are based on real people, are vicious, nasty little people. And death is the only way to be cleansed. And the book ends with, more violence, more murder, and it ends in water. And it ends with a very biblical sort of the rebaptism, in a sense, of Big Frank, Michael row the boat ashore kind of thing. And so, now that's not something, because when I chose to have the 4 books and chose to have original sin, and I broke it up into the 4 natural parts of that poem. It's about a page and a half in length. I didn't know exactly how I was going to end the book, but in my mind, in the undermind, is the workings of, okay, in this section, this is where things come together, and just as the end, that's the end of that poem, and it brings together what came before. So too in this chapter, I'm sort of recapitulating that, but on an unconscious or subconscious level. And the whole thing with the water and the violence and all of them are bad people is something that is obvious, but you don't know exactly what you're going to do. And then when you look back at the epigraph, you say, well, that really applies, but not in the way that I thought it might, but in a sense, even better and more deeply, because you have channeled what it's saying within. And that's one of the ways that an epigraph can really work, is that epigraphs that are tagged on to the end, at the end, after you've written a poem or beforehand, generally speaking, are probably not going to work as well. Whereas if you have an idea for a poem or a piece of writing, the epigraph, you're going to play off of it. It's going to either be playing off it, or it's going to actually embody what is being said. You have to sort of let it seep into you, and these things work, at least for me, in ways that you can't predict. But always at the end, it's the kind of thing that that critics will be having their hands down their pants, jerking off about it. What does it mean, the symbolism and whatnot? But it because it is all organic. You don't, I'm not worrying about every little thing. I mentioned, like, when I read some books, like I read some of these textbooks on literature that these high school kids these days are exposed to, and they so miss the point of literature. They so miss the point. They will have a poem and they'll try to explicate it. What did the author mean by this line? They fall into the intentional fallacy rather than critically looking at what works and what doesn't work and why. But when you do that, you miss the big points of what art is to do. And art isn't just about I want to say A, B, and C, so I've got to cram them in and then throw on a little artifices of art or philosophy. You have to really embody that, take in what you want to say or whatnot, but be willing to allow it to come out however it wants, and it will probably come out richer and deeper. At least if you're someone who's got a brain and got a good amount of talent, like I do, or like my wife Jessica does, or a few other people I have known over the years. But very few artists are willing to do that. They always want to hit you over the head and state something and do it. I was reading pieces of Virginia Woolf's writing, and Virginia Woolf is a bad writer. She's often praised as a great writer, but she's not a good writer in any stretch of the imagination. She's very surface level, and it's because of that she has this thing to say, and she will hit you over the head with it over and over and over. And that's not what makes for good art, much less great art.